The International Red Cross has been there. Unlike the representatives of the American Psychological Association, they've actually been in the cell blocks on the ground. We don't know the full extent of their access, but it's the most unrestricted of any group. In other words, they know more than anybody other than the military itself. And they have reviewed very carefully. This is the International Red Cross. They're extraordinarily legalistic. They're very meticulous in their work. And this was a confidential report that leaked somehow. They found that these techniques were torture. Okay? So there's an informed group, fully mindful of the international conventions, that has reported that this is torture. All right? So let's just make that assumption. Okay, let's assume that in fact U.S. interrogators at Guantanamo have been engaged in the practice of torture. All right? So the question is, what are we going to do about it? Well, Lieutenant General Kiley is telling the American Psychological Association, don't do anything, don't define it. Above all, don't define it. All right. My way of thinking is, above all, let's define it. Okay. All right. So why do we need to define it? Well, first of all, as we saw in the notorious August 2004 memo, when the Justice Department, the Bush administration, wanted to allow the CIA to torture, what did they do? They tampered with the legal definitions. They came up with this absurd definition of severe pain as being tantamount to organ failure. And they derived that not from relevant legislation on torture or human rights abuse. They got it from obscure Medicare regulations, okay? And through a kind of legal gymnastics, you wouldn't believe. So what I'm saying is that those who are the practitioners or enabling, those who are enabling the perpetrators are either getting informed groups to back off on definitions or using definitional legerdemain in order to allow the perpetrators. So definitions are critical. So the first thing I'm going to say is, the only thing I will say is to any professional body that has expertise that I do not even begin to have. And when I say that, I don't know anything about this. I just as a historian, I just line it up. I line up the paperwork, okay? And I have a certain purchase on this. I work on kind of corporate operations. But again, historians are generalists. So I'm not going to tell you what words, okay? All I'm going to say is words. You need a definition, okay? You need to define it. That's your job, is to define it, to draw upon your expertise. And what I'm also saying is that from my way of thinking, I find it stunning, absolutely stunning, that the American Psychiatric Association in 2006, okay, months after my book was written, can actually come up with a definition of the things their members not do, which is a palimpsest of my book. Okay, I mean, so they're dovetailed perfectly. The things that they prescribe are the techniques that I found historically, and using historical methods, operating the key techniques, and it's the precision. Again, if you look at Basuglu's article in Archives of General Psychiatry, published this month, in which he lists the physical and the psychological techniques. I think he's got off the top of my head, I've got the article, but forgive me if I got it wrong. He's got something like 70 techniques, okay? If you look at that American Psychiatric Association, they don't list 70 things you can't do. They list 6, and they get them right from my perspective. So I can say is that from my historical work, from what I found are the core principles, the key techniques that, as far as I can tell, define this paradigm. In my view, the American Psychiatric Association got it 100% correct. Okay? Now the paradigm's going to change. As I said, every extended application produces innovation, and they may have to amend their words, but for the time being, okay, they've got it right. Okay? And so if you start from there. That's all I can say. And how you go from there, that's your business. Okay?
Would you reiterate what those 6 items are?
Sure. Let me dig out my notes, because I don't want to do it from memory, because this is not my field, and therefore I have to always work from my text. Otherwise, I'll make errors of fact or interpretation. Okay, it says they prohibit their practitioners from exposing subjects to, quote, isolation, imposition of fear, humiliation, sensory deprivation or excessive stimulation, sleep deprivation, exploitation of phobias, or ... prolonged stress positions.
Precise definitions were, in my view, actually not that important, because the ethics code already directs us to behave ethically and to not abuse people. And whether or not something in somebody's book is cruel or an inhumane treatment, or whether it is torture or whatever else, the problem is that these things are being done deliberately, and that the APA came out and saying, we don't think this has happened, and do you have any names? Why don't you cite any evidence? And this went on forever until the evidence became, for everybody, so overwhelming that now the conversation is no longer about whether it actually happened or not, but what the next step is. So while I, on the one hand, would help in the effort of defining torture methods that are being used currently, and to say very specifically that's what you're not allowed to do as a psychologist, I would also say that any of the paradigms that could be invented are easily understood. And the question is whether the profession is willing to be an instrument in the execution of these methods, and how our professional organization takes a stand.
I guess I have a couple of thoughts. One, about the ethics code, the part of the ethics code, I guess 1.02, I can't remember where under which section, that I found that I still can't get my brain wrapped around, and that makes no sense, is the part of our APA ethics code that says that when a psychologist observes human rights violations, it is his or her duty to intervene, to try and stop it, to call the attention. But then there's this odd little thing that seems to erase the whole rest of the ethics code, which says, however, if this is a legal authority that is, or a military authority or whatever, a legitimate authority that is instructing you to go ahead and do these things, a psychologist may follow orders. I.e., for someone who grew up in the world following the Nuremberg trials, and heard from childhood on that following orders is not an okay excuse for, huge violations of human rights. The idea that you would have that this is still in our ethics code. So all of these things, anything can be, is fair game if you're following orders.